The scene inside the townhouse chilled detectives. The killing was controlled, deliberate. Whoever did it was patient. Nothing was left to chance. In the bedroom, a body lay in a pool of blood. There was evidence of hours of sustained violence. But the victim had done everything right. He had been cautious, thorough. He had followed every rule that people are told will keep them safe. And yet he was dead, and the murderer had vanished. Detectives weren't looking for a man anymore. They were chasing a ghost. May 2004. Oakey Albert Kite, known to his friends as Al, was a careful man. Extremely careful. He was an accountant by trade who was proud of the fact that he lived a safe and predictable life. After moving from New Jersey, he was living by himself in Aurora, Colorado, at his split-level townhouse at 2002 South Helena Street. It was a quiet and green part of town, home to middle-class families and kids riding around on bicycles. It was the kind of place couples chose to start families. Safe and situated right at the foot of forests and mountains. Ideal for Al because he enjoyed the outdoors. Life couldn't be much better. Al had a stable senior accounting job at the consulting firm Carter Douglas. And after a divorce from his wife Gail, he'd started dating Linda Angelopoulos. It didn't take long for their relationship to get serious. She didn't live with him, but a few years ago he had turned the bottom floor of his townhouse into a standalone apartment. After the divorce, having someone downstairs helped keep all of the loneliness away. Eventually, his roommate moved out. Al was financially stable, but he'd gotten used to the company, so he started advertising. Tenant wanted. And as always, he'd be thorough in choosing the right kind of person, preferably a professional or a post-grad, and someone with good references. Al was a warm person and usually very trusting, but he was judicious when it came to letting people get close. You never could be too careful. It was Tuesday, May 18th, when a man calling himself Robert Cooper saw one of Al's rental ads in the University of Colorado Anschutz medical campus. When Al picked up the phone, the man on the other end was well-spoken and polite, so Al invited him around for an interview, the first of 3 visits he would make to the home. Robert was early middle-aged, maybe younger, with dark thinning hair and brown or hazel eyes. He was decent-looking with a fair complexion, maybe about 5'10" and between 170–180 pounds. The one thing that stood out was that he didn't sound like he'd been born in the US. The accent was hard to place, but he certainly wasn't native-born. Al didn't pry out of respect, but Robert was obviously disabled. He limped and he couldn't get around without a cane. They immediately hit it off. Robert had the cash to pay the first month's rent up front, and he was more than happy to put down a safety deposit. The apartment was just what he was looking for. Like Al, he had a steady and stable white-collar job. He worked for Wells Fargo, which had recently transferred him from the East Coast. He told Al he'd been living with his sister, but he needed to get out from under her feet. The next time Robert came by, he was signing the paperwork when Linda showed up unexpectedly. She barely got a look at him. Then, when she mentioned needing to use the bathroom, Robert told Al he'd give them some privacy and quickly headed out the front door. By the time the toilet flushed and Linda emerged from the hallway, Robert was already on his way out. Strange, she thought. Maybe he didn't want her to see him. She only got a glimpse as he hobbled away on his cane without looking back. Saturday, May 22nd. Al picked Linda up at her house that morning to take her to the airport. She had some vacation time and she was going away for a week. She was excited, and so was he. His new tenant was going to finalize the lease and hopefully move in. At the airport, Al helped Linda with her luggage and kissed her on the cheek. "Call me as soon as you land." He was a worrier, so when the plane touched down at 3:30 that afternoon, she called, just like he asked. She didn't think too much of it at first, but his voice was different. It was tense, serious. Maybe he was upset about not seeing her for a week. It was a noticeable change from the cheerful Al that she'd said goodbye to just a few hours earlier. And that was the last time she'd ever speak to him. It was the last time anyone would ever speak to him, except for one man, a very disturbed individual. Monday, May 24th. In all the years Al had been a dedicated accountant, he'd barely taken any sick days. So it was strange that morning when he didn't show up for work. He hadn't called in either. It wasn't like him. He was the most reliable guy in the office. With any other employee, no one would have batted an eye, but his coworkers figured they should check up on him. They called his landline, but no one picked up. Then, when they called his mobile, someone answered, but it wasn't Al. It was a man calling himself Joe. Joe said he found the phone the night before in Denver, about 17 miles away from Aurora. He claimed someone had left it on top of a payphone in the Five Points neighborhood. He sounded friendly. He even volunteered to meet up with the staff and give them the phone. Just to be careful, a few of the staff went together. 5 Points could be a sketchy area, and who knows, maybe someone had stolen the phone. They pulled up in the car where Joe was waiting at the grocery store. He wasn't what they were expecting. He was obviously homeless. He told them as much, so when he asked for a $10 finder's fee, they were more than happy to pay. This had now turned into something of a mystery. If Al had lost his phone, he'd still have called the office through his landline. One of the staff, Philip, started going through Al's messages and recent calls. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. Al's sister, Barbara, was listed in the numbers, so Philip figured they would call her. Barbara knew Al as well as anyone. There's no way he would not call into work if he was sick. Something was definitely wrong. Already starting to panic, she called the Aurora Police Department. Maybe it was excessive, calling the police for an adult missing only for a matter of hours. But under Colorado law, if police receive a missing persons report, they have to act. They said that they would send someone to do a welfare check. Al lived in the Chambers Ridge part of Aurora. It was about as comfortably middle class as you could get. Serious crimes just didn't happen there. Not for a second did the officers think that Al could be in danger, but he might have had an accident. When the officers knocked at the door, no one answered. They walked around the back. All the doors and windows were secure. They couldn't see any sign of a break-in. They called Barbara back. She was in Virginia, so couldn't offer much help, but she gave them permission to break in. Officers forced the lock and made their way inside. Everything looked normal. The place was immaculately clean. Living room, bedroom, bathroom, everything was in perfect order. But as they walked into the kitchen, something immediately made them uncomfortable. All the knives from a butcher's block were soaking in water in the sink. There were a pair of keys there too, and some other objects. Judging by the smell, there was a lot of bleach. The atmosphere changed. They tentatively walked down into the basement, feet landing softly on the carpeted stairs. There was a living room and a bathroom, all very tidy. The place barely looked lived in. They approached the last room, the bedroom. They pushed the door slowly, and that's when they saw it. The kind of crime scene that will stay with a cop until his dying day. Al was lying on his stomach in a pool of blood. There were blood splatters on the wall, even the ceiling. He had been brutally murdered. This was now a crime scene. They called it in. Detective Tom Sobieski, the lead investigator, surveyed the room and the injuries to Al's body. He had never seen anything like it. He called the coroner and asked him to come to the house. Al had clearly been hit over the head with a heavy object. There were markings on his arms and legs, indicating that he had very likely been bound with rope or cord. What Sobieski noted looked almost ritualistic. Al hadn't just been murdered, he had been the victim of prolonged torture. Back at the coroner's office, they counted 22 stab wounds in his head and shoulders. Each wound looked methodical, like the killer had taken his time. His face was a mess. Whoever had killed him had wanted him to suffer. The cut on his throat that probably ended his life was so deep, his head was barely connected to his body. Why so much violence? The detectives would soon find out Al didn't have enemies. He was a lifelong accountant who had never once been in trouble or mixed with dangerous people. Everyone they spoke to said Al was gentle and kind. If you needed help, Al would always be there for you. Extreme overkill, like the kind inflicted on Al, was rare. And when investigators did see that level of violence, it usually pointed to one of three things: a sadistic offender, often someone with a history of repeated violence, organized crime, maybe torture, intimidation, or revenge, or a crime of passion. He knew what he was doing. He had worn gloves. Detectives now knew the phone that he'd used to make calls to potential renters, including Al, had been on burner phones. He had purchased one from a 7-Eleven a month earlier, probably knowing that CCTV recordings usually are wiped after a month. And when he called Al and other landlords asking about rooms, he'd always called from a different location, making it harder for anyone to locate where he might have been staying. The one thing police did have was a description, but it seemed the man had planned for that too. A few people had seen him. Al's neighbor said he tried to say hello, but the guy just walked past him with his head down. A female neighbor said she saw him walking on a nearby trail, but this time he wasn't limping or using a cane. She wasn't the only person who had seen him walking unaided. He was obviously trained in deception. The cane was a prop, and his face might have also been disguised. The witnesses would say that he could have been 30, but as old as 50. But for now, he was a ghost, and he certainly wasn't named Robert Cooper. Those references that he'd shown to Al were all fake. The address that he'd used on the rental agreement wasn't at a house but an elementary school in Denver. No one named Robert Cooper worked at Wells Fargo on the East Coast. As for the social security number he'd given Al, it led detectives to a woman in Indiana who it was soon clear had nothing to do with the case. This wasn't just a murder, it was the work of a seasoned predator. Detectives used the evidence to draw a picture of the last day of Al's life, moving day. Al had invited Robert over to the house. He'd said goodbye to Linda on the phone, and sometime after that, he'd been attacked. The evidence pointed to Al helping the guy take a reclining chair down the stairs. Obviously, with his limp, Al would have helped out. He could have walked backwards with the chair, and the guy, his cane now thrown to the side, smashed him on the head from behind. When he regained consciousness, he'd have already been tied up. Detectives found towels and blankets in the basement that had been pushed up against the window. The killer had made sure no one would be able to see inside for what had been possibly 2 or 3 hours of torture. Al's sanctuary had been transformed into a house of pain. They checked all the rooms downstairs for evidence, but it seemed all the torture had happened in the bedroom. Only when they were heading back up the stairs, one of the officers noticed a spot of blood on the stairs, a transfer of evidence. If that didn't belong to Al, this case was about to take a very different direction. The killer was professional. He had whipped and beaten Al's feet, a torture method used throughout history. The Nazis used it in concentration camps. The Khmer Rouge used it in Cambodia. Communist regimes in Eastern Europe did it too. If he was trying to extract information from Al, then he'd moved on to something far more gruesome. Torture almost impossible to imagine. Those knives in the kitchen sink had been used on Al's face. The killer had pushed the tip of the blade into both of Al's ears. He'd forced one of them into the upper part of Al's eye sockets, possibly trying to penetrate his brain. It was extraordinarily brutal. Detective Sobieski later said, "Some of the injuries were things I'd never seen before, like a knife into above the eye, into the ears, down through the shoulders, just a crazy amount of torture. The way he tied Al up, that too was remarkable. It was so exact, as if he had done it many times before. The bind marks indicated a hogtie pattern, but not just restraints on the wrists and ankles. There was an intricate system of bindings fastened around Al's upper arms above the elbows and twice above the knees. This was not something an average person would know how to do." Detectives believed the killer had used a rod as a kind of tourniquet, twisting the bindings as tight as possible. Al would have been almost completely unable to move. Rumors would surface that police found 40 feet of rope, but it wasn't true. They'd only found a few inches. What had happened in this house amounted to a very specific signature rarely seen in U.S. domestic homicides. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a military-grade infiltration. The killer didn't flee once his quarry was lying dead on the bedroom floor. For reasons detectives couldn't quite understand, he placed a towel over Al's mutilated head, but he hadn't immediately left the scene. What detectives still couldn't determine was the exact time of death. They spoke to Linda again, and she told them something possibly important. That Saturday, when she had called after landing at 3:30 p.m., something hadn't felt right. Al had said all the right things, but there was none of the usual bounce in his voice. It sounded nervous, downhearted. Detectives wondered if he'd already been threatened and was forced to speak to Linda with a knife to his throat. The evidence showed the man had eaten food from Al's well-stocked fridge and possibly slept in his bed. What is known is that he had showered in Al's bathroom and he had gone into Al's cupboards to take cleaning fluids. He had taken Al's wallet and his debit card, using it to withdraw exactly $1,000 from a Wells Fargo machine not far from the house. The killer had driven there in Al's truck and wore a ski mask and gloves. He had been smart. But here was the confusing part. If this extraordinary crime was really about money, why had he stopped at $1,000? He could have taken much, much more. So why didn't he? And why did he return to the house? He had the money, he had the truck if he wanted it, he could have taken off with valuables, but he didn't. He was there for about 24 hours, and he could have stolen a lot more. Al's sister Barbara had a theory. She told the media, this guy was doing it for the thrill. He just wanted to find people to kill. Before he left for good, he filled the sink with knives, the keys, and a sharpening steel, which investigators believed he had used as the rod and the tourniquet. There was no reason why he left those items soaking, just as there was no reason he had to leave the key. He could have put them back or taken them with him. It seemed he wanted the investigators to know Al had been murdered by his new tenant, and he wanted them to see the evidence. He was leaving clues. He was saying, "Catch me if you can." He was also smart enough to know to empty bleach all over the shower stall and into the drain where his DNA might be. That level of forensic awareness was unusual. It felt less like the work of a panicked amateur and more like someone who had understood exactly how investigations worked. It was the kind of precision you would expect from a seasoned investigator or a trained operative cleaning up a scene. In violent crimes, police usually start with finding a motive, but so far this was an almost entirely unique case. There had to be something they weren't seeing. An almost perfect murder, such a savage murder, surely had to have a complex motive. The perpetrator had withdrawn $1,000. The investigators now knew this was close to the amount he had paid Al for the first month's rent and deposit. In other words, this wasn't about theft. He was claiming a refund for services he hadn't needed. He just tortured a man to death in the worst possible way, yet wouldn't take more than he thought he was owed. What did this say about his motive? The investigators spoke with Al's family. They all said the same thing. Al wouldn't have been overly concerned about someone taking money from his account. There'd have been no reason to torture him. He would have given up the number easily. So if the torture wasn't about his PIN number, what could the killer have wanted to know? Police had now found the truck. They didn't know why, but the perpetrator had parked it about a block and a half from Al's house. He had left the ATM receipt on the passenger seat. Again, he was taunting them, seemingly purposefully leaving them breadcrumbs. Is that why he left the phone in a known homeless area rather than destroying it or throwing it in the river? This was a game to him. One thing he couldn't hide was his accent. Unless he was acting, this guy had likely grown up abroad. Detectives spoke to the other renters who had met him. One of them was a woman who worked as a professor at Colorado College. She was familiar with foreign accents, especially European ones. For her, the man sounded distinctly Romanian. But knowing her story just added to the confusion. The woman said her intuition could have saved her life. She was almost going to rent the room to the man but changed her mind. Something just didn't feel right about him. If she had been a target, then did that mean the killer hadn't specifically chosen Al? Did it mean the torture was not about extracting information? The alternative filled the detectives with dread. He had been careful, but even the most fastidious killers sometimes make mistakes. That drop of blood on the stair carpets, it didn't belong to Al. It seemed likely the killer had cut himself. The blood was fresh, so it couldn't have been anyone else's. Forensics experts analyzed it using DNA phenotyping and genetic genealogy technology, and they got a match. Whoever Robert Cooper was, he had family in Southeast Europe or the Balkan region. The university professor could have been right. He might have been Romanian, maybe had grown up during the oppressive Cold War era, but had spent many years in the US. The timing depended on his age, and that part investigators still couldn't figure out. But now they had a working theory. The torture techniques he'd used, the binding and the foot flogging, are known to have been used by the Turkish Hezbollah. An intelligence analyst later revealed the hog-tying method is very specifically linked to that organization. She went as far as saying that it was their signature. Could that mean Al was somehow an enemy? Investigators scrutinized every inch of Al's 53 years of life. On face value, he was just a regular guy working as an accountant. He'd spent 31 years of his professional life at one company, Stone & Webster. This was a huge firm, one that played a major role in building the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project. U.S. military infrastructure, nuclear engineering, power plants, Cold War-era government contracts. It was a tantalizing connection, but there was no evidence the company or Al might have attracted the attention of Turkish Hezbollah. But his work had taken him all over the USA. Massachusetts, Texas, New York, Nevada, Wyoming, Tennessee, a nuclear plant in North Carolina, and for a time he worked in Algeria. For a lot of his life he'd worked at nuclear facilities, including the one in Algeria. Al was a number cruncher, but he'd worked at senior levels, and senior accountants often see very confidential information. Is that why someone had pushed a knife into his eye socket? It wouldn't be the first time an American office worker was brutally killed after discovering information about confidential weapons projects. In 1999, an engineer at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory found what San Francisco Gate called a serious flaw in the lab's troubled $1 billion weapons testing program. The company was under serious pressure. The U.S. Energy Secretary Bill Richardson had just ordered an investigation as to why the project was delayed. The victim was 54-year-old Lee Scott Hall. He was the lead designer for the National Ignition Facility, which would monitor the U.S.'s nuclear stockpile. After discovering the flaw, he was found dead in his apartment. He wasn't just killed, he was brutally beaten. He was cut so deep his heart was almost severed, his kidney and his liver perforated, and Adam's apple crushed. Overkill. But this is the most disturbing part. Al used to work at the same place, and he was there at the same time Hall was. They were in different departments, and the firm employed 7,000 people. There's nothing to suggest Al knew Hall, but the coincidences, nuclear weapons, a brutal death, are hair-raising. And there was more. Police would later report that the company was uncooperative in the investigation. They'd also said that someone had parked Hall's car about a block away from his house, just as Al's killer had done. And whoever had murdered Hall hadn't stolen anything. His wallet was lying around when the police arrived. No one was ever caught. Did Al know something about that same project and the huge amount of money involved? Was he planning to leak it? Detectives couldn't discount it. They had to look at all the angles, including his nearest and dearest. 60 to 70% of murders are committed by someone who knows the victim, family, lovers, or friends. Al was divorced, but he'd separated from Gail way back in 1998, and it was all very amicable. They'd remained good friends, and she was not in a position to gain money or property after his death. In terms of Al's regular life, there wasn't a single person that would want to hurt him. Police had to look at the serial killer theory, that Al was targeted by a maniac for no other reason than he had a room to rent. But the extreme torture he'd endured wasn't common even in the realm of serial killers. The problem with this theory is that all those men and serial killers in general are sexually motivated. They harbor what profilers call paraphilias, but not all. An FBI report once said that 80.5% of serial killers have a sexual motive. Had Al met one of the 20% who didn't? There have been theories that Al's killer could have been Israel Keyes. Keyes was an avid hunter and honorably discharged from the U.S. Army who enjoyed killing his victims slowly. He died in prison in 2012, but when he was alive, he had drifted around the U.S. picking random strangers to torture and murder. He was very organized, meticulously planning his crimes. He also wore disguises and avoided phones. But he didn't use knives as the main murder weapon. He was 26 when Al was murdered, so he was also probably too young to be Robert Cooper. But like Keyes, Al might have been murdered by what profilers call a thrill killer. A thrill killer who was driven by power and control. And if that was the case, surely Al wasn't his first. If that's true, other similar murders should have shown up on the FBI's VICAP, or Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Robert Cooper's MO and signature were so unique, a match would have been in there. And they have his DNA, which will now have been entered into the CODIS system. It's an active case, and it seems investigators are holding their cards close to their chest. But right now, this man who once called himself Robert Cooper is likely still out there. He is someone's friend, someone's neighbor, maybe even someone's husband. And he could be planning his next torture session right now. While the Colorado Phantom vanished without a trace, an aspiring filmmaker wrote a literal script for his own Hollywood murder. Click the video on your screen now to step inside the terrifying trap of the Dexter copycat, Mark Twitchell.